Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How Did We Not Know That? I'm Nat.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Esteban.
Yay! Hi, everyone. Today we have a very special guest. It's my very good friend, Esteban, and he will be presenting on healthcare around the world, right?
That's right, yeah. Talking a little bit about different healthcare systems across the globe, and especially something that's like relevant to the United States as well. So,
Okay.
yeah, so I guess we can start at the very beginning for people who don't know sort of what a healthcare system is. Just doing some basic research and sort of my own background knowledge. So healthcare system really is composed of really three things. And so first you have providers or medical providers who are actually providing your care. The second is really the population of the people who are taking advantage of that care. And then three is really insurers or who's paying for your healthcare. So those three things really make up a comprehensive healthcare system. And I guess something off the bat that people might be familiar with seeing on health insurance cards are the abbreviations HMO and PPO. So in the United States, we have those two abbreviations for insured providers. But I can just sort of go into the basics of what those two differences mean. If you've ever seen HMO written on your health insurance card, it really stands for Health Maintenance Organization. And so they actually cover your care by integrating with private providers. So an example is like Kaiser, an insurance company, but you pay them the premium, and they sort of like give you a set list of doctors that you can see. But if you don't see these doctors, you have to pay out of pocket for your care. And then the other sort of big insurance type of company in the United States is a preferred provider organization, or PPO. So you still get that list of doctors that you can try to see, but your flexibility is greater. So the list isn't mandatory, and the insurance would still cover a portion of it if you do decide to go to a physician that's really not on their list of doctors. So those are really like two of the big differences in the insurer types that we have in the United States and what composes our own healthcare system. So it's just a brief introduction.
Okay. With like the PPO versus HMO, when do you get to decide which type you have? Is it just based on what your employer chose for you?
Great question. Yeah. And I think it's really based on what your employer is willing to pay or help pay the premium for. So I think it really depends on employer, but also, I mean, if you're self-employed or even unemployed and looking for health insurance, these are two different types that you might see.
So what is Medicaid under? Is that going to be HMO or PPO?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Probably PPO, right? Because
I would, yeah. So actually, these are, I think, more relevant to insurance providers. So like Medicare, Medicaid is actually something that we can get into a little bit in the future of talking together, because that's almost like a completely different model of providing healthcare. So these are really like insurance companies provide care, right, and pay for it. Sort of the connection between the people and the providers. But Medicare and Medicaid are sort of related directly just to the government. So the government is the one actually paying, not the insurance company.
Okay. So then is this unique to the United States healthcare system?
Yeah, great question. So we can talk about some models that I've read a lot about in the new book that I recently read called The Healing of America by Reid. So he gives a great sort of overview of different healthcare systems across the globe. But no, this isn't really, I guess, unique to the United States. Like there are definitely insurance companies in other countries. And we can talk about how they've sort of integrated that into a healthcare system and model for their own countries and how it works. So yeah, I mentioned the book, The Healing of America by Reid. And if you look up Reid on YouTube, I mean, he's a great sort of speaker about healthcare systems across the globe and really sort of helping you gain a better perspective of what you think is the best choice for America going forward. But he started one of his recent videos that I watched with a quote from a president who won election. And the quote goes, "A nation as prosperous and successful as ours must guarantee the health of all of its men and women. Safeguarding healthcare for every American is not a sentimental wish. It's a matter of justice." And you may think that sounds like a presidential candidate that, I mean, should have been in the running really recently, but that was actually said by Woodrow Wilson in 1912 in his election for president. So it's like not uncommon that Americans have sort of been vying for a healthcare system that covers every single person in trying to recognize that it's sort of a moral dilemma that everyone deserves access to healthcare. But there are a series of different associations that have sort of hindered that over time in history. And one of those has been really the American Medical Association wanted government sort of separate from healthcare back then. And so it sort of snowballed into what we have now, a little bit more of that separation. But I guess what he talks about a lot in his book, and some like of my own opinions on it, is that all other rich countries in the world provide healthcare for all of their people. So everyone is covered, but they spend half of what we do in the US. And so the unanswered question is really, why has the richest country in the world never made the commitment to provide healthcare for everyone? And I think that's what a lot of voters who prioritize healthcare as one of their main voting issues today in the United States is worried about and wants to know more about. So I guess I can go over an overview of sort of T.R. Reid's models and explanations, because it'll help explain a lot about how other rich countries around the globe are dealing with healthcare systems. But I guess to start off is the US is definitely sort of on the top in terms of strengths with, we're able to provide the best medical education in the world. We have some of the most innovative scientific research and development of new therapeutics in the world, and we have some of the best equipped hospitals. But we are spending tons of money on healthcare. And obviously there needs to be some sort of change going forward for our healthcare system to be able to pay for people who are also left out of our system. And so I guess I'll go over 4 models, and if you guys have questions, I hope I'm able to answer them. But I can also sort of give a little brief history of where these models come from and sort of the countries that are utilizing these models. So really these models focus on 2 main, I guess, categories. So really it's who's paying for healthcare and who's providing healthcare. And so in one of the first models that's spoken, it's termed the Beveridge model. And William Beveridge was a British man. And I believe like the history here is that Winston Churchill after World War II actually employed Lord William Beveridge to investigate sort of social services for the United Kingdom. And based on his investigation, they decided that it was the government's responsibility to cover everyone in healthcare. So it was decided pretty early on for the United Kingdom. And the Beveridge model, to summarize, it's universal healthcare coverage that's financed by the government. So they are the ones who are paying for it. And the government owns everything that's provided for people. So they own the physicians and all the other things that go with providing healthcare for these people. And it's financed by the government through tax payments and other heavy leverages, but the British people are very happy with the system. So this is actually a model that's used in the UK, where it was sort of invented and sort of kinked out. And then also in other countries like Spain and New Zealand have sort of adopted this more socialized medicine, which actually I think a lot of people stereotype that like all of Europe had socialized medicine, right? But if you're thinking about that stereotypical socialized medicine, I think this is definitely found in the UK, and they term it the National Health Service is who provides all of that. The second.
Oh, sorry,
yeah,
before you go ahead.
No.
So under the Beveridge model, how does that affect the wages of like medical workers, like healthcare workers? Because one of the main arguments I hear against socialized medicine, as Americans like to put it, is that it would decrease the wages for healthcare workers. So like, what does that look like in the UK?
Yeah, great question. So like what I know from just some background reading and talking to friends in the UK. So I lived in the UK for a little bit and got to experience the NHS. But something that they have struggled is, yeah, salary does come down for specialized areas of medicine. So something like, I don't know, a neurosurgeon is paid much less in the UK than they would be paid in the United States healthcare system. I know that this is an anecdotal story, but I know that sort of in history, I mean, every country struggles with providing family care physicians. And the way that the UK has done this is that they've decided to pay family care practice physicians in the UK more. So I believe like their workforce is made up of over 60% family care practice physicians who make twice of what a specialty doctor would make. And it sort of has, I mean, with this control by the NHS, they've sort of been able to change what types of physicians people want to be in the UK and practice as, but is also sort of covered that shortage for them. So I think when you have a system where the government is running both payments and sort of providers, they have so much more control and regulation over how they want to switch the dynamic instead of it being very slow and sort of like this free market type of exchange.
Oh, also, I have sorry, I have a question about just like European healthcare in general because so I know like because of Brexit, like England is like no longer part of the EU, but as a part of the EU, isn't there like their healthcare? Isn't it also like if you live in the EU and you visit another country that's in the EU, isn't your like healthcare covered if you need to like go to the hospital in another EU country? Like, do you know how that works?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't actually know the answer to that, but I mean, I guess I can share a personal experience of just going from like the United States to the UK, not within Europe exactly, but I essentially just paid a health surcharge fee when I sort of, I guess, immigrated to the UK for school. And the health surcharge fee was not that much money. It was $1,200, but I was covered in the NHS system. So, I mean, if I had come down with something very severe, like breaking my leg in a bike accident, I would never receive a bill for that by the NHS, and it was all covered by just that international surcharge fee that I paid for health insurance to be covered for the year that I was there. So I think that's also something that my friends in the UK sort of are always shocked about when I talk to them about like copays. My friends are like, "What's a copay?" I never pay anything for healthcare. So I mean, it's covered by the government, and with that, they've had to cut a little bit for costs and things like that. So they also do decide they do have to make some, I guess, harder decisions later on about who can receive what type of care or what type of care is necessary for someone to receive. So another story that I have from a friend who's in Britain is her wisdom teeth are growing out, but because they're not causing her any pain, the NHS doesn't cover wisdom teeth removal. So until they start to cause her pain, the NHS won't step in to pay for that. And so there are like various other things that they control and decide to pay for. TRE talks about a really funny one, is that the British healthcare system covers the Viagra pill. And Viagra is like a very expensive drug in the United States. And so everyone's wondering like, okay, if the NHS is pressed for money, why are they covering such, a drug that seems like a luxury or something that you would pay out of pocket for? And they're very proud that I think, I've read this, or I've seen it on a video, but they're very proud that the inventor of Viagra was British. So they sort of take like that additional pride. Yeah.
That's literally so funny.
Yeah. So, I mean, they have control over what they're willing to pay for and who can receive the care. But it's a little bit always sort of a tug and pull balance there.
Yeah.
So I guess while we're talking about the UK and sort of the beverage model, I can talk about some statistics. So sort of health outcomes of what their system provides for their people compared to the US. So we can talk about some statistics now. And I'll quickly give an overview of sort of healthcare spending. So in terms of healthcare spending per person in 2018, the average British person spends $4,070 versus the average person in the United States is spending $10,586. So we're spending more than double of what people in the UK do per person with our different systems. And then if you want to use another metric, there's healthcare spending by percent of GDP. So total GDP of the country in 2018 in the UK, they spend about 9.8% of their total GDP on healthcare. And in the United States, that's much, much higher at 16.9% in 2018 when that was last calculated. Also, health outcomes for people in these systems, there are huge differences. Life expectancy at birth in the UK in 2017 was on average 81.3. Versus the United States, around 78.6. So you have a huge difference in life expectancy for people. Also, the infant mortality rate per 1,000 births, which is sort of a measure of how well the system is doing for people there, in the UK was 3.9 in 2017, and in the US it was 5.8. So we have a much higher infant mortality rate in the US as well. So you do see that they're spending nearly half of what we spend in healthcare in the United States, but also having at least comparable or even greater health outcomes than we are. And just to summarize, I mean, it's a service you use and you never get a bill, but you are paying it through higher income taxes. But again, if people want to argue and say like, oh, I don't want to be taxed more, healthcare spending per person, that statistic sort of brings it back the reality that people in the United States, maybe you're not paying it more in income taxes, but you are paying more out of pocket for drugs and for procedures that aren't covered by health insurance companies, or even a different thing that you're covered by like Medicare, Medicaid. And so I think that's where the discussion starts with that sort of argument. And yeah, so the way that people pay for it, if that's a question that you guys have, so the more money you earn, of course, the more taxes you pay and the better you contribute to the system. And like I mentioned, some services are paid out of pocket, like dental, eyes, and some prescription drugs. But these costs are still low compared to the US. So I think the statistic was that they still pay 57% less than the US in sort of these terms of healthcare, in terms of providing this sort of healthcare. So for dental, prescription drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, most of the general practitioners or family practice physicians are contractors with the NHS. So they kind of contract with the government and establish contracts with how much they can earn for their services. So the government sets that price list of how many patients they see and what they pay these healthcare physicians. And I guess just to end there with the UK, there's very strong support for the NHS in the United Kingdom, and I think all British people are very proud of their system because I think they know that it works better than the US's. And I mean, they really don't know what it's like to just get a bill for healthcare because it's something that they use as a service provided for everyone.
Must be nice. Also, can you define NHS for everyone?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm so sorry. That means the National Health Service. So that's what Britain has termed, their healthcare system.
Oh, okay. So that's just like Britain's healthcare system is what they call it.
Just Britain. Yeah, the NHS.
Wow. I can't imagine like never having a copay and just like you just walk out of
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day and it was from I think like NPR Life Kit, and they were saying like this is how you negotiate your way out of a medical bill. And I was like, the fact that we need to have like informational, and there's like a whole system of how to do it, and all these terrible stories of people who have been slammed with like $100,000 in bills for like emergency surgery. I was like, we shouldn't have to have this discussion anyways. This shouldn't be something as part of the Life Kit from NPR that you need to know.
Yeah, it's really crazy. And I think, I mean, I'll get into talking about sort of health insurance companies in other European countries around the world, but like they are different from the ones we have in the US because here in the US, like you can still have a health insurance company deny your claim. So they can say like, oh, I'm not going to cover that. Like you got treated for it, but I won't cover it. And elsewhere in other richer countries, like there's regulation where insurance companies can never deny a health claim. So they have to pay you back even in a certain amount of time, or your premium's free the next month or something like that. So there's just so much more regulation, I think, even in health insurance companies in other richer countries around the world. So I guess that's a great overview of what I guess I'm stereotyping here too, but like most of what Americans think healthcare is like in Europe. But the truth of the matter is other countries in Europe also have different healthcare models. And the second one that I'm talking about today is called the Bismarck Model. So the second model that T.R. Reid talks about in his book, The Healing of America, and explains a lot of what other countries do, is called the Bismarck Model. So the Bismarck Model is used by countries like Germany, France, Japan, and other European countries. And so some history on that. The Bismarck Model is actually named after Otto von Bismarck, who was sort of one of the first people, I think in the 1870s, who sort of unified all of these German-speaking countries. I think Prussia was one, into one country called Germany. And he created many sort of, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is he created the welfare state and started to send everyone money from the government. So sort of this more like prominent role of the government in the people. He was one of the first people to think about things like Social Security, workmen's compensation. And then by the late 1800s, I think, is when a universal healthcare system through insurance companies was established by Otto von Bismarck. And so it's termed sort of the Bismarck model, first developed then and still used in Germany today. So again, going back to organizing how these models differ, it's really who's paying for it and who's providing care, right? So in the Bismarck model, who's paying for it? So the system is actually financed by insurance companies, with employers and employees sort of splitting the cost through payroll deductions. Sort of what might sound very familiar to what we have in the US, and what many or even a majority of Americans have health insurance and through. But in contrast to the US, these insurance companies are all nonprofit. They are regulated and must enroll all citizens regardless of pre-existing health conditions. And also, in contrast to the US, the government will step in when someone is unemployed and pay for someone to have insurance through one of these healthcare companies. So, I mean, in the US, if you're laid off from your job, you lose your health insurance because your premium is paid pretty much through them as well as your own income. But in other countries, especially Germany, the government steps in when someone becomes unemployed to cover their care. And then again, going back to that second part of the question, so who's providing the care in the Bismarck model? So all the hospitals and practices are actually private practice. So they're not run by the government like the National Health Service in the UK. And really generally, Germans and other people who use this system really like their health insurance companies because insurance companies have to pay doctors within a certain amount of time. So, I mean, I think it's even a few days in Germany where the doctor can bill the insurance company and they have to pay them within a like 3-day period. Also, on top of that, if patients pay out of pocket for care, they have to be reimbursed within something like a 2-week period, or your premium is free the next month. So there's a lot of these sort of checks and balances with insurance companies and people using them in the Bismarck model countries. But they also have really strict regulation of insurance companies. So like I mentioned previously, they can't deny health claims. So they have to cover everything. Also, you may ask, like, how do unemployed or self-employed individuals not lose health insurance, or how do they deal with that in countries like this? And the government will still step in and pay half of your premium or the whole premium depending on your income level. So even people who are unemployed or self-employed still have some of the help from the government. But for the most part, the government sort of has allowed insurance companies to finance healthcare in these countries. But it works well because they have great regulation of insurance companies.
Okay, question on that. Is there a cutoff on your salary range where they will stop helping you pay? So let's say you're making like 6 figures and then you lost your job, like you have this whole family and everything. Does the government still come in, or do you make too much for them to come help you?
Yeah, good question. I think based off of what I know, I think that premiums are paid on sort of an income level sort of gradient. So if you do have a higher income level, you're going to be paying the highest premium for that insurance company. Whereas if you make not a lot of money or you're sort of low income, you get more help from the government. And that sort of, I guess, equitable way of distributing what they do for keeping people insured. But I think what's really important is that the government makes sure that everyone in the country is employed because they have either they don't have the money or they have the money to pay for health insurance.
Wow. Yeah, actually, so when I was studying abroad in Japan, I was required to enroll in health insurance there. And as a student, I only paid like $10 a month, I think, for health insurance, and they
Wow.
cover 70% of my bill. So I never actually like ended up going to the doctors or like hospital there, but yeah, the monthly cost was so cheap as a student, so it was really nice.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, to keep along the same lines, if you guys want to try to visually compare how Germany and the UK compared to the US in terms of health statistics and spending, I can give you some of the same statistics and even add a few. But health spending per person in Germany is still kept to $5,800 as in 2017, again, compared to the US, which is over $10,000 per person. And then percent of GDP is also a little bit higher than the UK. So Germany spends about 11.2% of their GDP on healthcare, also compared to the US, which is over 16%. And then again, I think going back to what the benefit of this model is that the percent of people covered by Germany is 100%. And in the US, it's, I think, still only around 91.2%. That was in 2017. So even in the United States today, I'm sure there's more than 28 million people who are uninsured or don't have any health insurance. But this country is able to provide that care for everyone. And then also in comparison, I guess, there are just better or comparable health outcomes as well in terms of statistics. So they do have a longer life expectancy than Americans and a lower infant mortality rate as well.
I'm jealous. Yeah, we pay so much money and we're still gonna die first.
Yeah. So You asked about South Korea and sort of how South Korea deals with health insurance, and that leads sort of into the third model that TR Reid discusses. And going back to those two questions, who pays for it and who's providing it? So the national health insurance model is what it's called. It's used by, the main example of the national health insurance model is Canada, but it's also used by smaller countries in Asia like South Korea and Taiwan. But it combines a bit of both the Beveridge and Bismarck model systems, where services are provided via private healthcare providers, but payments are processed through a government-run insurance program, which is funded via taxes or a premium paid through employers. So you have both like a mix of who's paying for it, it's the government, but who's providing it, it's actually private healthcare providers. So it's mixing a little bit of those two different model types. We've talked about the Beveridge model in the UK, the Bismarck model in Germany, and then the national health insurance model is what we would term for Canada or South Korea and Taiwan.
Oh, the national health insurance model. Okay. NHI.
Right.
I was like, NHS? No, insurance doesn't start with an S.
But I mean, even within these countries, they've termed it this is sort of like TR Reid's umbrella term, and each country has its own term for it. So like in Canada, they actually term their health insurance system as Medicare. Talking about the national health insurance model in Canada, they're able to sort of limit costs by limiting treatments that are paid for and or making patients wait for elective surgeries. So you always hear about people in the US maybe complaining that people in Canada have to wait so long to be seen, right? I mean, they have limited the number of surgeons, types of medical scans and specialty care that they are able to use for people in Canada to save money. So you will end up on a longer waiting list if you need to take care of like a shoulder that's just bothering you because of arthritis. But for acute care, everyone is treated. But if the medical problem can wait, then you kind of also end up waiting in the system, and especially in Canada. But again, like I mentioned, it's paid for through a government-run insurance program, so sort of like a single payer system. So everyone pays a tax, and I think they call it a premium in Canada, where everyone can go to the doctor for free, but they pay into the system that pays out to all of the privately owned healthcare providers. So that's sort of the system and how it works in Canada, and how they've sort of tried to limit costs with it, but also make it work in their own country. And then I guess like jumping to Canada and the US, since we're sort of comparing statistics here, they still do have comparable or even greater health outcomes than what's being used in the US. They also have cheaper drug prices, but I guess a comparison you can make off the bat between Canada and the US is it's a single payer healthcare system, sort of like the proposed Medicare for All program in the US by candidates like Bernie Sanders, that you may have heard of in the news. And I guess in terms of statistics, healthcare spending by percent of GDP, Canada spends about 10% of their GDP. And the US is again over 16 to 17% of GDP. And then healthcare spending per person, the system ends up costing people about $4,500 per person versus the US, which is over $10,000. And then even out-of-pocket spending per person is less in Canada than it is in the US for other things that aren't covered by Medicare in Canada, like certain prescription drugs or something like that. They still end up paying less out of pocket per person than people in the US. And again, I guess talking about health outcomes, their basic universal healthcare coverage still has comparable or better health outcomes compared to us. So life expectancy at birth in Canada is almost 83. In the US, it's nearing 79, but it's not quite there yet. And then even the infant mortality per 1,000 births is about 4.8 in Canada. In the US, it's 6. So I guess just to summarize, what Canada is following is sort of a publicly funded model with private providers. But it was really, I guess, Canadians take a lot of pride in this system because it was established to ensure health equity among citizens, regardless of people's ability to pay and keep. And they do this by keeping administrative costs low and sort of making those checks and balances in the system. But I guess you might be asking, like, how do these countries determine what's covered, what pills will be paid for, what procedures are allowed? And in Canada, I mean, it's all determined by the health ministry, who makes these larger decisions. And I don't know where they're based in Canada. Maybe it's Ottawa. Yeah, no. actually
Yeah,
what's
Ottawa's
wrong.
the
But
capital, isn't it?
yeah, I think it might be in Ottawa where the ministry actually meets and decides what's covered every year, what new pills that have come onto the market are paid for, and which procedures are allowed for basic universal healthcare coverage. And then I guess in comparison to the US, these decisions are made really by individual insurance companies. So I mean, say Nat and Jacqueline have different insurance companies in the US, they each can decide like what sort of healthcare procedures are covered. So one of you guys may have one that's covered by your company, but the other won't. And so there's no really like centralized system regulating what insurance companies are deciding to cover in the US. But I think like what characterizes Canada's system is really that they're valuing equity so that everyone receives the same care. Although Medicare in Canada isn't able to cover everything, like dental and other healthcare costs. I think one of the other things that hasn't been incorporated into the system is like paying for things like mental health. So I think therapy and things like that isn't covered by the Medicare system. But you can buy supplemental private insurance through employers, which do cover things like dental insurance, eyesight, and other things like mental health services. So I guess those are some of the problems that a lot of people might talk about with Canada.
Yeah, actually, like when I was in Ottawa, there was like I was interning at the Parliament, House of Commons, and like the MP I was interning for, he was on the health committee, and so that was like we focused so much about providing like universal dental care for Canadians. That was like that was his big issue that he was focusing on. And so yeah, I think they've been really pushing for universal dental care in Canada because yeah, then the supplemental like private insurance I think is really expensive. So yeah, that's just like something you might see on the news.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, like because like you mentioned earlier, like the really long wait times. I've also, yeah, that is a complaint that I've heard like from my Canadian friends. And then also, I think like sometimes I guess the quality of, yeah, like the quality of health services can sometimes vary, like depending on the region of Canada you're living in, or I guess like, yeah, the province. And so I guess some Canadians, like if they have a severe medical condition that requires like what would you call it? Like a specialized physician. A lot of Canadians like will go to the US actually to get like specialized care just because the quality is, I guess, a little better in their opinion. But yeah. But
Yeah,
then
yeah, no, I definitely have heard about Canadians coming across the border to get healthcare for some of those sort of, I guess, different like elective or more advanced procedures. And I guess like something that also limits them in Canada is that because Canada has sort of decided on health equity as sort of like their big decision defining this model, you can't, even through like supplemental private insurance in Canada, you can't have them pay for a procedure that's covered by Medicare in Canada. So they don't want like someone who has a ton of money being able to purchase private supplemental insurance and then being able to go to a better physician when that procedure is covered under Medicare, because they want everyone to have the same care that's paid for by the government system. So if you have supplemental private insurance in Canada, it can only pay for procedures that aren't covered by Medicare.
Oh, that's interesting. Also, with the Canadians that come to the States, isn't that really expensive for them? Because they wouldn't have American health insurance, right? Like it doesn't transfer over.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just assuming that they're maybe paying out of pocket for some of the procedures that they get. But
What? Like what type of do we have examples? Because I'm just thinking of like if you wanted to come over, maybe it's something extreme like open heart surgery. Could be upwards of like $100,000. Do you really want to come to the States and pay $100,000 for? I guess if it's life or death, yes. But like you're uninsured, that's all out of pocket.
yeah, I mean, I think something that comes to mind and something I've heard of is, I don't know, maybe like you have a lousy shoulder, and it kind of hurts when you're like trying to grab a cup from the top cupboard, but In Canada's system, it might take you 8 to 12 months to get an appointment to be seen by a specialty care person for that sort of like ailment. And then it might take another 4 to 5 months to actually have a procedure done where you can get that shoulder worked on or fixed. So like, I think something like chronic pain and issues that sort of get like pushed to the end, and something that maybe a Canadian might come across the border to seek care for if they have the money.
Okay, that makes more sense. Instead of like open heart surgery.
Yeah, I would hope that's covered by Medicare in Canada.
Right, what the heck?
Yeah, I mean, sort of like it's characterized, I mean, okay, I'll start here. Yeah, I mean, the model might need some reform in the future, but Canadians are still very proud of their healthcare system. And I think a lot of Canadians I've spoken to, and maybe Nat also, is that they're very proud because they know that it provides sort of healthcare for everyone on an equal level, but they also know that it's still better than the US system. There's lower costs and higher health outcomes. So Canadians are very proud of that.
Is the pride stemming from that they're better than us? Like, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
Yeah, War of 1812 throwback.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess enough about Canada, and
Yeah, enough about them. We don't need to, just kidding.
and the national health insurance model. But the last sort of model that Reid discusses is the out-of-pocket model. So I mean, it's very transparent and mostly available in developing countries. And I think, I mean, there's only about 50 richer countries across the world that have actually established healthcare systems. But really, most of the countries in the world have an out-of-pocket model. So I mean, it's as simple as it sounds. Only those who have money for healthcare can afford to access and pay for it. So who's paying for it? It's out of pocket, and who's providing it? Really a combination of private care providers. So this is something you might see in like a rural African country, and I guess really not great health equity there.
I have a question. Do you know the model for specifically like Senegal and China? Because I got healthcare in Senegal and China, and I thought, first off, China was a trip. That was like the emergency room. But it was like affordable, and I did get the care I needed. It just was inefficient and not as clean as the United States. But Senegal was really good. Yeah, so I don't know. And it was like very affordable. Like, what model do they have? Is that out of pocket maybe?
Yeah, I think like off the top of my head, I don't think China has a healthcare system that is able to, or like has even decided to try to cover everyone in the country. So it's more of an out-of-pocket model. So I mean, if you can provide, so maybe the healthcare costs are lower, but you need the money to pay for them because there's no sort of government association or even insurance companies that are super established with providing care for everyone. And then Senegal, I would think the same, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, like, especially China, there's so many people. There's like 1.3 billion people, so I can't imagine like them being able to use like any other model to like cover every citizen. That would be
right. Yeah.
Be
Yeah. No,
one.
definitely. I think people talk a lot about like the large, like Brazil, India, China, and Russia, who are all going to surpass us a lot in population and how they're going to deal with healthcare systems. But a lot of it right now is sort of up in the air and sort of out of pocket model for most people.
Is that kind of why I guess the United States healthcare compared to other developed countries is lacking? Could it be due to our population size?
Yeah, so I mean, that's like the ultimate question, right? Like, why is America's healthcare costs so expensive, even though we're the richest country in the world? And I mean, like, why does America have worse health outcomes than other countries that we've talked about today? And I think the answer to that is that we employ all of these types of models in various ways or different I'll go back. So like the reason really is that America employs all these types of models in various ways. So I think it's just a regulation or really like an organization of using so many different models in the US that it ends up being very expensive in administrative costs, but also there are people who are left or falling into different gaps and trying to organize so many different models for one country. So it's not a one size fit all in the US, and I think that's why it's so expensive. So depending really where you fall in American society, and trying to get access to healthcare providers, you receive different treatment and care. And I really think it's this disorganization of our national healthcare system that leads to high spending per capita and also eventually worse health outcomes compared to other developed countries, because you have millions of people being left behind without health insurance that really speak to a lot in those statistics. And I mean, even for example, like we don't go to the doctor as much as people do in other richer countries for preventative healthcare treatments. And even with each visit that we do, we pay more. So I guess it might be helpful to expand a bit about how the US healthcare system employs all of these models. So we can take a look at some of the types of people treated in each sector. And I mean, maybe even some listeners might be able to identify where they fit in here. So the first model we talked about, the Beveridge model of healthcare. So Native Americans in the US, veterans and active duty military personnel are covered by the Beveridge model of healthcare, similar to what you would find by the National Health Service in Britain. So you never receive a bill for your treatment. You're treated by the government, by government hospitals and employees, and the government buys the pills, and they really cover sort of the costs and providing the care. So that's sort of maybe the type of people that you might find utilizing the Beveridge model of healthcare in the US. Whereas the Bismarck model, which is what we talked about second in Germany, provided by health insurance companies. So this is really mostly the majority of Americans. So sort of the working person splitting your insurance premium with your employer, if that sounds familiar, or if you're self-employed and buying into a health insurance program. These are sort of more similar to the Bismarck model of healthcare, similar to France and Germany. I think about 150 to 160 million Americans receive care through this route. But again, the big difference here is that our insurance companies aren't heavily regulated. We even have for-profit insurance companies in the US still, which sort of blows my mind. I mean, are you putting the money back into providing the best care for people, or are you providing dividends for people on a monthly basis? So I mean, the regulation in America really lacks in terms of health insurance companies compared to countries like France and Germany. And then talking about, I mean, if you're over 65 and you're getting insurance in the US through a government-run program called Medicare, you're a person experiencing something similar to Canada, like the National Health Insurance model. And I think more than 40 million Americans are on this model in our system, sort of the aging population. And then if you're part of the nearly 30 million uninsured Americans in the US right now, you're like a person living in a developing country in rural Africa or South America, because you're using sort of the out-of-pocket model that we discussed earlier. So I guess what T.R. Reid talks about a lot in his book, and I'm like a huge plug for this book. Jacqueline said it was boring.
You don't have to bring that in there. Cut that out.
I'll say, yeah, so I mean, another big plug for this book, The Healing of America by T.R. Reid, is that he is able to, I mean, bring up like, what's the main difference between us and other countries around the globe? And he mentions that all other countries have decided to pursue one fundamental model. So it's not a mix of all these systems and rules and models and administrative costs, like trying to figure out what sort of, who's providing your care and who's going to pay for it. So I think like that's the advantage of using a one-size-fits-all healthcare system, especially in the US, because it becomes simpler and cheaper to manage. There's a set of rules and prices that are set by a governing body. There's cost and transparency. So if you go to the doctor and you want a medical procedure done, they can tell you how much it's going to cost. Because right now, I mean, if I went to the emergency room and I don't know, needed stitches and asked how much it would cost, they would say, well, I don't know, like who's your health insurance provider? I don't know how much they're going to cover. They won't be able to tell you. Versus like having a system where you have that price schedule and they can tell you exactly how much it's going to cost, who they're going to charge, who's going to pay for it. And then also I've mentioned administrative costs, so that's sort of a vague term. But I guess to expand on that, it's a lot of like the paperwork and the backside of deciding who has health insurance, who's charging their health insurance company. And in the US, I mean, the statistic is that there's about an 18 to 25% cost in just administrative costs to every bill that they pay for medical procedures. And what other countries have found using one single model is they are able to keep these administrative costs low. So I mean, Canada has a 5% administrative cost, Britain is 5%, France is 3%, and I think Taiwan keeps it below 2% of administrative costs, versus the US, who is spending a lot more money in terms of just trying to organize and balance all these different systems.
Yeah, it seems like how I can't even imagine trying to regulate everything in our healthcare system, because there's like there's so many different models, and it's like, I guess it just, your healthcare and your like health insurance experience depends on where you are in society, and like it's so different for each person. It's like, how can you expect to regulate that if there's like 4 different models, I guess. Each person
Definitely.
has.
Yeah, and I think just like one of the, I mean, what's crazy about our healthcare system right now is, I mean, if you're covered under something like Medicare, and you're receiving the same exact procedure, it, doctors receive less for the procedure when your provider is Medicare, because it's being paid out by the government. But if you have private health insurance, they're able to charge your private health insurance company more. So the private health insurance company is paying more for the same procedure than a government paid out version of Medicare.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, that's wild. Can you talk about like, not to get too political, but yeah, can you talk about kind of the pros and cons of Obamacare? Because one of my friends from Spain was talking to me, and he was talking about healthcare. This was before I had any idea about like what the healthcare system is like in America. And he was complaining about the American healthcare system, and he was like, Obamacare, I mean, Spain had that like way back in the 1800s. You guys are so far behind. So what was Obamacare? He was saying it was like a first step towards getting better healthcare. What are the pros and cons? Yeah. Why do people complain about it?
Yeah, no, I think every American has this question, and Obamacare is always thrown out there, you know. And now, I mean, even I'm not an expert on Obamacare. I can just sort of share my own perspective of what Obamacare brought to the system for us. But I think like the biggest parts of the Affordable Care Act is that it expanded coverage to, I believe, over 20 million more Americans who are uninsured were able to apply for health insurance coverage because they across all income levels tried to expand. I think it was Medicaid and other health insurance, I guess, private coverages. Sorry, let me back up because I'm trying to like organize my thoughts there.
Okay.
Yeah, that was too wordy.
Oh, you got it. You're doing well. It's like a lot of good information, and I think you're explaining it really well too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, way better than the book. Oh, reading the book was like falling asleep.
Okay, so I'll talk about, okay, yeah. So I mean, yeah, I'm definitely not an expert on the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, but I can just share a little bit of my own perspectives on like what it brought and maybe what your friend was mentioning in Europe. So I mean, off the bat, something that comes to mind is I've mentioned private healthcare insurance companies in Germany and France can't deny you coverage based on pre-existing conditions. So in the US, before the Affordable Care Act was passed, I mean, here's an anecdotal story that was shared in T.R. Reid's book, and something that was like very vivid, and I remember so well because it took like, I mean, I was just like blown away that this existed in the US. But before the Affordable Care Act, so there was this woman who was working. She had a great job just outside of undergrad. Like she was, I think, 23 or 24. So she wasn't covered by her parents' healthcare insurance. She had just gotten a new job, so she was getting health insurance through her new job, but she was off of her parents' health insurance. So, I mean, that's another addition of the Affordable Care Act. It extended coverage on your parents' health insurance until you're 26, but before it used to be much younger. So you dealt with a lot of young people who were uninsured. But anyway, so she got this new job, but then she came down with symptoms of lupus. And because lupus took a really heavy toll on her life, she lost her job. So losing her job, she lost her health insurance. And in Europe, like I mentioned, in France and Germany, if this happened to you, the government would step in and pay your premium for you so that you still have health insurance for healthcare. But in her case, she couldn't be, she didn't have a health insurance. So she was paying everything out of pocket for care until she was, or actually, sorry, the story she shared is that she wasn't making anything because she was laid off. So she applied for Medicaid for low income in the US, and she was getting some basic coverage through Medicaid, but she was having to go to particular doctors who could treat lupus, which weren't her initial physicians that she was getting through her employer paid insurance, so she had to change her provider. which had a huge toll on sort of figuring out her problem and also in her care. But once she started feeling better, she was getting the right drugs, you know, through Medicaid. She ends up getting a job, and then she makes too much to qualify for Medicaid. So now she's uninsured again. So she starts looking for insurance companies in the US. And before the Affordable Care Act, they could deny her coverage based on her pre-existing condition of lupus. So she had to say, like, I have lupus, I'm looking to be covered. And the insurance company could say, I don't want to take you because you're going to cost money. And so they denied her coverage. She couldn't find a private healthcare insurance company. And I believe she ended up dying very young before she turned 30. But I mean, like, something like this, one of the European models, I don't think ever would have happened, because there's at least that basic universal coverage for people to have covered those drug costs. But I mean, this is a story before the Affordable Care Act. So I mean, one, she couldn't get health insurance through her parents because she was too old. The Affordable Care Act extended that. But also now if you can pay for private healthcare insurance companies, they cannot deny you based on pre-existing conditions. Mm-hmm. The other thing that the Affordable Care Act did was expand Medicaid for tons of lower income individuals. So I think it expanded for more than 20 million people who were uninsured when they applied for the Affordable Care Act, and were able to have a marketplace for health insurance, covering, like, purchasing their own coverage.
I have a question too. So I hear a lot of complaints over Obamacare on an increase in taxes for people because they feel like they're paying out for Obamacare. Now, is that true, or is the issue lying in the fact that there's privatized health insurance companies that can control your premium? So if they now have to cover more people who have higher health risks, then they increase the premium for everyone else under the insurance.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a common complaint. I don't know the answer off the top of my head of how directly they're impacted by, like, increased taxes for the Affordable Care Act. But I do know, like, when it expanded coverage, I mean, more people are being covered under this program that's being paid out by the government. But I mean, I think my own response is just my opinion, is that, like, I'd rather pay higher taxes now than have to pay out of pocket later when you do need the care. So I mean, if you have, like, a system that is covering that, might as well pay it all up front, because US still ends up paying nearly twice of what other countries are paying per person every year. But it's in hidden costs that you don't think about, like prescription drugs or co-pays and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm already paying a ridiculous amount for my healthcare, and if I were to lose my job, and if, like, before the Affordable Care Act, and I lost insurance as well, and I lost health coverage, it's like, well, what was all that money that I was paying before? Like, where did that go?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's frustrating. Yeah, I would like, man, like, I think you mentioned it earlier, but I think just a lot of Americans don't really go to the doctors or go to the hospital like for preventative measures. Like, I only go to the doctors like if it's an emergency, and that was the biggest culture shock for me coming to South Korea. Like, here it's just so much more affordable, so people just go to the hospital like all the time. I know a really common thing is people will go to the hospital to get like IV treatment if they're really hungover, and like it like barely anything. So like, yeah, I would just, like, my friends would just be like, oh yeah, I was in the hospital this morning, and like, to me, like, that's just it was just really shocking to see how convenient and how affordable healthcare is.
Yeah.
Here.
No, I totally agree. My friend in the UK, yeah, no, she's shocked when she says, like, you receive a bill for your emergency room visit. Like, I've never received a bill in my life for healthcare. But I mean, she says it does lead to, like, overuse of the system sometimes, where people just show up in sort of like the comparable to our urgent care with things that, I mean, could be taken care of at home. But for the most part, I mean, everyone is covered. So, I mean, something like that anecdote I just shared of the woman with lupus, like, that probably would never have happened in somewhere like the UK. Mm-hmm. And yeah, no, talking about preventative care in the US, I think that's one of our biggest issues right now in our healthcare system, is that it sort of like limits access for a lot of people. But I mean, even people with health insurance companies, I mean, co-pays, that's what they're supposed to do, deter you from overusing the system. But you have people who, I mean, have I mean, they have an ear infection. They're like, oh, I don't really want to pay the $40 copay. I don't want to go to urgent care right now. It'll get better. And I've seen this, I mean, even shadowing physicians where a woman who had an ear infection didn't go because she didn't want to pay the $40 copay. It ended up turning into a septic infection, which is lethal. And had to get like tens of thousands of dollars in care when she could have just paid the $40 copay, gotten some antibiotics, and likely killed the infection before it was infecting her bloodstream. So, I mean, there are cases like this in the US where, preventative care really isn't at the forefront of our values or something like that. But I mean, since we're comparing all these countries, it's important to mention too, I mean, like even health insurance companies in Germany and in France. So Germany's like competition between insurance companies is sort of benefits of what they can offer people who join their insurance company. So in Germany, I feel like, I think they offer perks based on your preventative care. So if you go to the doctor at least once a year, you receive a certain amount of reward points or something, which are paid out in like, I don't know, maybe some sort of gift card compensation or something like that. But I mean, for the healthcare insurance company, it's very low. You're paying like a $600 premium a month, and they're giving out these small incentives. But I mean, it's all preventative care, so they're going to catch something before you end up developing a septic infection, and the health insurance company has to pay out thousands of dollars for that versus just getting you those antibiotics when you need them. So I mean, it keeps costs low for them as well.
Mm-hmm. Wait, T on that, have you guys seen the TLC show Dr. Pimple Popper?
Yes, I love that show.
Bruh, like I was thinking about it. The reason why these people are coming in with, for lack of a better word, like these extreme skin problems is because they were probably uninsured or they were scared to go to the doctor to get it figured out when it was a small issue, and now it's like huge. And but I mean, that's how we got Dr. Pimple Popper. So
so I guess like what is the solution to the healthcare issue in the US? What's your opinion? How do we fix
great question. Something I'm like always thinking about. And I mean, solutions are offered by T.R. Reid in his book, The Healing of America as well, which a lot of my opinions come from. But I think, I mean, the main issues in the US right now is we have lower health outcomes in comparison to these other richer countries who have other healthcare systems. And we also are paying twice of what they're paying. So it's like, how do we reduce costs and how do we extend health outcomes in our own system when we're one of the richest countries with the best medical providers, the best sort of scientific research going on and innovation in therapeutics. And I think it just plays back to the beginning where like it's very expensive maintaining so many different systems in the US, where it creates a system that's kind of like a mystery. Like you don't know how much you're going to pay for a procedure. You don't know who's covered by what procedure because it's just very confusing on who's providing the care and who's paying for it. So I mean, I think going forward, it's very important that we have like a set price list of how much the bill will be. So there's like that standardized cost and transparency aspect. This is something that's been rolled out in countries like France and Japan. And I guess just the thing about going toward like a single payer healthcare system in the US, which is a lot of what's talked about in politics right now, is that lobbying groups and healthcare companies set prices right now for a single payer system. So it's maybe something that we won't see very soon. But I think just one system that allows you to create a transparent cost and charge schedule, as well as making the like decision that we want to cover every single person living in the United States one way or some way or somehow, is very important. And I think what's very important for me in healthcare is really expanding coverage to everyone, at least having a system that's able to provide universal healthcare coverage across the board. And I think one of the solutions in politics talked about right now is to expand Medicare for all. You may hear that a lot. And that's essentially having the government cover all adults 65 plus and below 18, but then allowing adults to buy into the program. So the government would be essentially paying for your care. But I assume that care would still go on being provided by private physicians and things like that. But there'd be a more transparent schedule. So it would maintain coverage at a lot of participating hospitals, but it would also allow for easier access to healthcare options. And I think it's just like a transition to one sort of system or model. So it might not reduce costs immediately, but I guess we won't know until it's in practice. I think that's the hard thing about the US healthcare reform is that no one knows really what to do.
Yeah.
Just final thoughts. I give a lot of my background knowledge and a lot of like my opinions sort of on the book by T.R. Reid, and a lot of what I've watched him talk, because he travels across the world, to learn these systems. So if you want to know more, highly recommend the book, and highly recommend just looking him up on YouTube. You'll hear an overlap of a lot of what I've said today.
Wow, well, thank you so much for sharing. That was like really, really incredible. You did a really great job at giving us such a comprehensive overview of literally healthcare around the entire world. It's like, man, that was really good. Thank you so much for sharing, because it makes more sense now. I always thought like healthcare, like, oh, it's so confusing. I don't understand anything, but yeah, the problem, I feel like the healthcare issue in the US is really complex, but when you break it down into just like the basics, it's a lot easier to understand and digest.
Absolutely. I think this was a big, how did we not know that episode? Like, how did we literally not know? And it's one of those things that I don't think like we know growing up as children, because we don't worry about it. But after I got my first job, and then I'm paying for my healthcare and I'm paying for my care now, it's just ridiculous. And I was complaining to my mom about how expensive healthcare is. She was like, what do you think our premium was per month? Like, what did you think our deductible was? It's thousands of dollars. Was like, she's like, this is why, like, I tell you, if you're sick, take a leave and sleep. Like, you're not going to the doctors.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's something that you don't start to think about until you're sort of like making the transition to adulthood, and then you're like, oh, this is slapping me in the face. Like, I didn't know any of this existed or how it works.
Right.
Yeah.
Esteban, thank you so much for being our guest. We really are happy to have you.
Thank you guys for having me. I hope I was qualified enough to talk a lot about the topics today.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm excited to have been here, so thanks for that.